So it's gone about 1 minute past 2. I think we can probably get started. So I hope you can all hear me okay. Thank you very much for joining us today for our monthly Teams Learning webinar. My name is Mark Tyers. I'm the co-founder of Formation Tech, and today I've got with us our Head of Technology, Mike Gilroy-Scott. Mike's been in the communications industry for many, many years and seen many iterations of what Microsoft have been doing in this world, and also more latterly, that journey that we've taken through Teams in the last few years. If you've got any questions, we also have Carl Hardy adjudicating, who will be on chat and will be able to let us have any messages that you have any questions during the webinar. Of course, at the end, please do feel free to follow up with us or your account manager to discuss anything you want to kind of follow up on. So look, the topic of today's webinar is Teams Voice, what's holding you back? We're going to touch on some of the trends we're seeing in the voice market today. And this is a market that has changed beyond any recognition over these last few years. Before, we were all working in a hybrid way. Before pandemic, voice was predominantly a standalone offering. It was a PBX, or it was a similar solution that sat independent of a lot of what you did through the rest of your business. But for a lot of organizations now, it's just a part of the wider collaboration suites. You know, along with IM, with video, with screen sharing, voice is just a component of that for a lot of businesses, or that's the journey they want to take. There's still, having said that, a lot of ways of working that have remained unchanged from before that period and still need to be supported. And we're going to cover a few of those things today. And you know, we've spent a lot of customers who also moved to platforms during the pandemic that had collaboration suites, had video capabilities, had IM. And now businesses and users are driving to have a single application, which is often Teams, to simplify the way they work, the way they support, and that often means bringing voice into it as well. So the 5 key areas we sort of outline I'm going to cover here is the big switch off. That's coming pretty soon down the line. PSTN will cover a bit of detail for anyone who doesn't understand or know what that is. Through some of the application pieces around call reporting, contact center, and call recording. The fifth kind of point here that runs through that whole thread, again, I've mentioned it already, is the need for a single application, just to bring the simplicity to the user base, simplicity to the IT teams, and you know, to bring that all together. So Mike, look, let's kick off on the first topic here, call reporting. It's something that I'm seeing as getting discussed in almost all conversations we're having just now, and businesses need that visibility of how well they're performing, handling customer calls with distributed workforce. Now, there's a number of things you can do in Microsoft natively. There's obviously applications that exist within the Microsoft ecosystem help support and enable that further. So do you perhaps want to touch on this point as a starter?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great place to start. I think, you know, one of the questions a lot of people have is just like, you know, I have my phone system, I'm able to get these management information out there, you know, my call answering KPIs here and what my teams are doing. And you touched on it already around, you know, the distributed workforce and the ecosystems around collaboration platform. We're getting so used to kind of just being able to work from anywhere. It's getting harder and harder to just sort of keep tabs on what's going on, and the platforms like Microsoft Teams sort of, you know, supports that. So, you know, what sort of visibility do you get when you move your voice into Microsoft Teams? And whilst it provides, you know, metrics and information and some basic reporting out of the, you know, the Teams admin center, quite a lot of people who want to access that information are not given access to the Teams admin center. So, you know, because that's usually the domain of the IT teams. So you don't really want to be handing that out to anyone in the organization, those line of business managers who need that kind of reporting information. So that's the sort of first challenge. The second challenge is, you know, you might want a bit more visibility than just sort of static information. You might want to build some custom reporting rather than just take the data that's coming from Microsoft. So you might need to spend some time kind of sifting through that data, trying to make sense of it, you know, how you track a call that was transferred from an auto attendant to a call queue to a user, which was then put on hold and then transferred. That sort of information will be kind of on you, you know, given the information that's come out of Microsoft. Microsoft have tried to sort of help people out. They've provided some Power BI templates that you can use. But again, if you don't have any Power BI expertise in house, you know, you're just going to have to live with the standard reports and the information you're getting from Microsoft. Another challenge is, even with all of that information, it's kind of on demand, you know, having to go and find that information when you need it. Quite often people have got used to being able to schedule reports, you know, so that on a Monday morning, last week's report for their team comes through to them automatically. Again, not exactly possible with the native features of Microsoft Teams. And lastly, I think there's some people have got used to some of these reporting systems giving you maybe some dashboard information, some basic information about performance of teams, the sort of gamification, etc. That's quite possible with a lot of the existing call logging systems. So, you know, people want to be able to do that with Microsoft as well. And I think the important point at this juncture is to say that just because Microsoft doesn't do it natively doesn't mean there isn't a whole ecosystem of partners and platforms out there that can solve all those kind of issues.
And in fact, you touched upon dashboards a moment ago, and we are going to talk about the more mature contact center type offerings that are available through the ecosystem in Microsoft Teams. But, you know, from an informal contact center point of view, we sometimes talk to customers and we find actually what we're looking for is not necessarily that very mature full-blown contact center offering, but actually the cool reporting functionality lends itself a little bit to somewhere in between, because of the shared presence across teams already exists, and that's a kind of a big kind of key factor for distributions of calls and distributions of communications. Before we move on to the more sort of higher end contact center capabilities, do you want to perhaps touch upon that and what they might offer?
Yeah, so that's an interesting point. I mean, we talk about the sort of main way I differentiate between sort of informal contact center and contact center is like, do you need absolute real-time information? Do you need to see, you know, calls in queue? Do you need to see who they are? Do you need CRM integration? Any of those kind of things, I would say you're sort of shifting towards more formal contact center. Everyone else is kind of like, you know what, I just need to see roughly what's going on. How many calls am I missing? You know, how many people are available to take calls? And this is where things like dashboard information, which is sort of near real time, because the information is usually being gathered by these platforms using Microsoft Graph API, which is just a mechanism for it to take data from Microsoft and go, we'll do all the processing and present that back to you in a nice, easily readable graphical interface, and, you know, can solve a lot of people's problems without having to go full-blown contact center.
And actually, a final point slightly associated with this is obviously the reception console. So, you know, a lot of people moving from legacy infrastructures, PBXs, might have had a big flatbed console. They might have had a soft console of some kind. And again, you know, this same sort of technology, this same application suite offers some additional capabilities there. Do you want to perhaps, when we move on to the sort of more formal contact center area, perhaps touch upon that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, I touched on it earlier about, you know, that more real-time granular information. You know, you want to see how many people are in a call, how many people are in a queue, and, you know, what numbers they are, because they've fished them out of your CRM. So you're doing a bit of a data dip, for example, and you want to distribute those calls across, you know, a team who are handling high volumes of calls, let's say reception teams or reception desks. And, you know, you don't want to rely on sort of legacy, you know, the Teams application, or indeed a handset with BLF buttons, or, you know, busy lamp field buttons for sort of quick transfers. You know, you get a much more granular kind of control over what's going on, and then off the back of that, you get all the reporting, all the KPIs and the metrics, you know, that information plus your historic reporting as well. So again, coming back to the ecosystem, just because Microsoft is not solving it natively out the box, and it's got some interesting tools around collaborative calling, which is essentially routing calls into a Microsoft Teams team essentially, and then having like a centralized call log for that. It's kind of a halfway house, and it's not really delivering the information that people require. There are vendors out there who will work on various different levels of integration within Microsoft, from a very basic Connect certification, which is just using a SIP-based connection into Teams. It's pretty rudimentary. It's not very integrated into the platform. It's really just bouncing calls backwards and forwards between the two platforms, to more advanced stuff, which is using the Extend certification, which means it's native. It's using all the Microsoft communications APIs to handle the calls and deliver those calls. And they, generally speaking, will run within the Microsoft ecosystem in the Azure, etc. And then very lastly, there is one last certification in terms of contact center with Microsoft Teams, and that's Power. And that's leveraging the Azure Communication Service to essentially provide omni-channel functionality from voice, text message to video, using the Azure Communication Services to deliver those calls, whether they be voice, video, or text message into your agents, essentially.
You mentioned ecosystem quite a few times, and it's interesting because that is kind of underpins a lot of this, doesn't it? Because I think where, you know, the subject of this webinar is about barriers to moving to Microsoft Teams voice, and if you look at natively what you get out of the box, actually when it comes to a lot of these things you just talked about, they aren't supported natively, and it is that wider ecosystem that allows it. And the other theme here, which I mentioned in the introduction here, is about that consistent single user experience, keeping everyone on one application. So we're in the topic of contact center just now. We haven't touched upon the sort of more complex things. You can now do whispering and barge, and you can, for training purposes, wrap up codes, reason codes. And I know that obviously you can also, on a native level, integrate on a level with CRMs, for example, within Teams. But just, do you want to perhaps touch on that before we move on to the next piece?
Yeah, let's take those examples. They're quite good ones. People moving away from not just on-prem PBXs, some of the cloud-based collaboration platforms support sort of more advanced training features like Whisper, which is the ability to join a call silently and just whisper to the agent some information, or barge or intrude on those calls as well. Natively not supported in Microsoft Teams at the moment. Who knows what they will bring down the road. But if you needed to provide those things, again, ecosystem partners will be able to deliver you a feature and functionality to deliver those kind of services. I forgot what the other one was on there, Mark, actually.
Yeah, no, well, it was just, I guess it's the broader point that, the single user application,
I've remembered now.
brings into,
It was the reason codes. Yeah, so the reason codes and the CRM integration. So natively out of Microsoft Teams, you're able to pop a web field with a very basic HTML search query, such as the phone number. So there is an element of that basic integration from Microsoft Teams. But if people want to be able to click to dial from their CRM, or indeed pop the information into their CRM and do some follow-up actions, that again, a whole series of partners who will help you develop and sort of, because CRMs are king around people because the data is so important. And if you can automate your staff's lives with these kind of processes, you can save a lot of time and money and increase productivity as a result.
Fantastic. Look, before we move on to the next topic, we talked a little bit in advance of this webinar around some of the areas of progress you see perhaps coming either into Teams or into some of the partners, around places that will further develop contact center functionality within Teams. So do you want to perhaps share a couple of thoughts around that?
Yeah, so there's an incredible, powerful set of tools from Microsoft. The Azure Communication Services is really starting it, which allow organizations to develop very native Microsoft Teams and sort of Azure-based communication channels. The ability to sort of embed chatbots into your website, so your people can engage with your staff through, they don't even have to leave their same Teams applications to engage with their customers and provide support. So all those kind of great channels, and exciting things about those chatbots could be using things like Copilot and ChatGPT to provide those kind of responses and those sort of automations.
Well, it's hard not to do a webinar without talking about AI, ChatGPT, and there's a lot of stuff coming up around Copilot. It's an interesting
we got to
topic.
14 minutes. I think that's got to be a record.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, we finished the last webinar talking about some AI and call recording in terms of looking at transcriptions and how that can work in quality assurance and reporting on user experience, or a whole combination of different performance metrics. But on a more basic level, call recording itself, people are, we're recording this webinar just now, people know how to do that. You doing a video call, it's natively there. Perhaps a lot of businesses need a lot more than that. And again, looking at this sort of old to new world, where just because people are working in a different way doesn't mean that the fundamentals of what they need to do has changed. It's just where they're doing it. So do you want to perhaps maybe touch on call recording on a level there?
Yeah, recording has become so valuable and so pervasive. It used to be just the domain of those who are, have some sort of compliance requirement to do that through the FCA or kind of through PCI DSS. But, it's become so useful to sort of keep track of conversations, important meetings and those sorts of things. So pervasive among the platform, but it's slightly complicated in Microsoft Teams is that the voice element of it doesn't automatically qualify for that. In fact, Microsoft exclude it from any kind of voice recording policy or capability. So in order to get call recording into Microsoft Teams voice, you have to subscribe to a certified vendor to provide that kind of service. But the good news is, Microsoft have a fully capable API to facilitate that, and a lot of these platforms are very simple because they're SaaS solutions. There's nothing really to deploy. They're all tapping into the APIs that Microsoft provide to support this, and it gives you great control about your data sovereignty. So if you have particular requirements to keep recordings in particular regions, all those sorts of things, then you have options available to you. And then, of course, you've got the compliance part of it, and you've got people who might need certain compliance reasons or retention policies. And again, the good news is there are options to do all of these things. You touched on things like transcriptions. Most of these recording providers will offer some sort of transcription service, and some of them even allow things like sentiment analysis and keywords.
Yeah, there's a question just coming at you about, does Microsoft Teams support live call analytics?
I think the short answer is probably no, not natively. And we touched on this back when we were talking in the contact center area. So if that's what you mean, I think I mentioned this before, we've got a call coming in. It's, let's say, keep it very simple. It's ringing a call queue of 5 people. Natively, you don't know how many of those 5 people are online or any time without individually going to look and check everyone's status. They might be in meetings, they might be having a one-to-one call, etc. They might be on do not disturb for some reason. You don't really get that kind of information. So it's really important that if you need that kind of visibility, that you plug in the right application to be able to deliver that kind of visibility.
Yeah, and I think interpreting this question here, whether we're talking about the content of the call, you talked about tone and sort of sentiment and such like. Now, that information, what data exists, and the applications that kind of sit in around that, are certainly coming, if not already there, and certainly not wanting to go too deep back into AI, but that's the sort of stuff that, when you're looking at compliance, if you're looking at, we've worked with insurance companies that need to say certain things at the beginning of a call to ensure that they're compliant. They need 25, 50, 90% of QA on that. And if you can do that in an automated way, then all that stuff is absolutely coming, if not already there.
There is, sorry, we will come to the Alan's question in just a second. The last piece I'll add into that is, if you're invested in Microsoft Dynamics platform as well, there is quite a nice sort of call recording and sentiment analysis capability. It does require some significant investment in licensing on Dynamics, but if you're down that road, there's a really nice proposition. It's way outside the scope of this webinar, so we'll come on to that. But yeah, we can move on to Alan's question now. Yeah.
So is Microsoft Teams, is there an auto attendant functionality? So
yes. Do you know what? This is really funny. We always pick up the ones which we think, people don't think to ask, but actually to keep it down to the basics. What kind of call routing and, call treatments does Microsoft provide? Yes, it provides auto attendants. Yes, it provides call queues. So the auto attendants are primarily used to provide sort of IVR, time of day routing, business hours, holiday routing, all of those kind of things, which support things like text to speech. So you don't have to pre-record messages. You can upload your custom music on hold files, all of those sorts of things. So short answer is, yeah, absolutely. We can do auto attendance in Microsoft. Yeah. If, however, the native auto attendant features are not quite satisfying your requirements, you need a data dip, for example, into a CRM, absolutely, you can solve that. That's also possible as well.
And again, reporting, you can report on hunt groups, you can report on auto attendance, you can look at cradle to grave kind of routing and see what's going on. So there's a whole bunch of stuff to do with that, and that could be, I'd say, out of the box what you get, or we've got a bunch of partners we work with that will deliver an enhanced experience for both reporting, integration, and otherwise.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Alan. If there are any, don't be afraid to ask. This is an open forum here, so we'll try and get to the important things for you guys. So if you've got any more of those, send them in.
Yeah. So I'm sure we'll navigate back to some of these points, but I think come back to the final part of the area we're going to talk about today on the big switch off is analog devices. Now we could almost do a whole webinar on this. I'm not sure it'd be the most exciting webinar that you could do, but it's a topic that nonetheless is it's been relevant since we as a business started out moving legacy infrastructure to the cloud, and how do we cater for these sometimes devices that aren't end of life, they're just using a certain protocol. In a factory there might be some bells and phones sitting on a wall that have been there for 10 years and actually do a perfectly good job, and why put them in landfill and put an IP phone if you can actually leave them where they are and connect them in. But in a broader sense, do you want to perhaps maybe kick off this final part of this sort of webinar?
And I'll try and keep it brief, because I think the question that a lot of people ask themselves, well, they make an assertion that I can't move to Teams because X, and sometimes that X is, you've mentioned a couple there. I've got this factory and I've got a load of bells which connect back to a legacy PBX, which I need to ring because they can't hear it because the machines are so loud. Again, solvable. People still have fax machines. Solvable. People still have lift lines. Solvable. That we solve this using infrastructure that takes that legacy and converts it to the modern, in this case, SIP as the technology. So Microsoft is capable of integrating with SIP platforms, and we have a long history of working with these platforms, so we've got all this experience to be able to build and deliver these kind of mechanisms. So just because you have something that's legacy doesn't mean you can't move to Teams. You'll have to we'll help you deliver something to solve those problems.
And in fact, this same technology we're talking about here also provides the options for resilience. So because there's an on-site element to what we're providing here, we're effectively replicating a lot of what's in the cloud. Do you want to maybe touch on that and how that plays into it?
Yeah, it can get quite interesting. There's solutions I've delivered. I had a sort of gallery customer who had they maybe even been on this call, but they probably won't mind me mentioning this, but they had sort of 17 lift lines that they needed to support as part of the building, and we helped them come up with a solution that delivered that, and that provides an element of on-site resilience should there be any problems in the cloud. So it gives us extra routes into making calls to and from Teams, and that sort of resilience as you mentioned. So it actually, whilst it's providing an adjunct to what you need to deliver Teams voice, it also provides some options for you.
Yeah, and with a very large site like that as well, the advantage of bringing them into some newer sort of technologies, you can monitor, you can manage, you can set alerting. So if something happens, rather than them not being able to ring someone in a lift when it's stuck, you're going to know in advance what's going on.
Exactly.
So
that's the last thing you need, is if someone's in an emergency and not able to make a call. So yeah, just being aware of any kind of issues before they occur or before they're needed is extremely important. So yeah, monitoring and management of all of these solutions is incredibly important.
Brilliant. We've got a couple of questions here. So Mike, I have a view on this as well, but Mike, your view on calling plans versus third-party SIP providers?
So calling plans, I think with Microsoft, you buy your Teams license and you buy a calling plan, or I think there is a pay-as-you-go calling plan as well for which Microsoft has very sensibly released to allow for people to be able to do calling, but just on a pay-as-you-go perspective. The rates not particularly favourable with Microsoft in terms of value for money. It's inflexible, but it works. You also using Microsoft as your telco. So whether that's a problem for you or not, it's not really for us to judge that. That's kind of for you. Bringing other carriers in, there's a couple of options. One's called Operator Connect, where you deal with the carrier and they provide you with what I like to call SBC as a service. So that's they basically building the infrastructure for you and you are consuming it, but you're paying usually price per user per month for all of the users that you have, regardless of how much they use it. There is another sort of third option, which is direct routing, which works in exactly the same way as the Operator Connect, but lacking some of the APIs and the support processes between Microsoft. But it gives you the most flexibility. And some of the things we've talked about today, this on-prem to do the analog switch off, are not options provided by Operator Connect. So there's no right answer to this. But it really does depend on what suits you as a business, how you're consuming Teams voice. So, we operate generally in the direct routing space because it can be everything to anyone, basically.
But I mean, equally, we have plenty of customers who may have already moved to Teams and then looking at the wider applications. How do I report on my calls? How do I improve my contact center? X, Y, and Z. And I think I can answer that more commercially than technically, in that, the way Microsoft price their calling plans, they do price it on a per user basis. And I think that the view we take in voice, which we sort of outlined at the headline of this, is voice is now a component of collaboration. It's not the same. It's not the same as it was 3 years ago. So not everyone has the same needs. So we really look at the utilization that a customer needs, and we can apply the correct number of lines to an organization, which fundamentally reduces the cost. But it's a much better commercial model because it's a bit like buying a lease line. You don't buy a lease line based on the number of people you use it. You buy a lease line based on the number of amount of data you need. So that's kind of that piece. And I guess the other part to a migration is that if you already have SIP trunks, you can swing over the IP address. You can just take them from the current platform to our gateway that we would deploy for you. And it negates the need to port. You can even keep those lines with that carrier if you wanted. Our interest is in making sure those lines are the right number of lines, that they're maintained and up and that they're working well. So, but to Mike's point, lots of options out there, and if you're interested in discussing with any of us here, very happy to go through that. So just looking to see what other questions we've got here.
There's a point from Nick. Yeah, thank you for contributing there around, using the Teams admin center to sort of get that sort of real-time information of call metrics, etc. on real-time calls. Yes, that is possible through the admin center, assuming you have that. The all of that metrics and data is available on the Microsoft Graph API. Again, we'll do another webinar on this, but we have a tool which can tap into that and provide you with surrounding data to sort of complement that, from headset to your laptop to the ISP that you're connecting, all the way through the infrastructure from the SBC and the SIP provider, giving you that end-to-end visibility as well. So there's a lot of rich data in there that's untapped and unused at the moment, and it can be used to extreme effectiveness to help diagnose call issues.
Fantastic. Well, look, if anyone else has any further questions, please, again, feel free to ask your account manager. They'll be reaching out to you as well. I always like to finish these webinars with a question, Mike, around future progress. And it changes every month, every day at the moment. There's so much happening. But, I guess the question to you, just to sort of wrap this up, is, where do you see Microsoft Energy's going to further develop Teams voice, increasing this sort of pace of transition? What kind of cool stuff are you seeing out there that's going to be relevant to the audience today that you'd like to perhaps touch on?
Yeah, I mean, just because Microsoft Teams has a voice solution doesn't mean there's no development going into that. Most of it's into the APIs and how that works and it integrates with sort of more advanced systems, but also in sort of rolling out of additional features. And one dropped the other week that we weren't anticipating, which was quite a nice one, which is being able to delegate out to users or team leaders, etc., to be able to manage things like their business hours without access to the Teams admin center. So there's a constant evolution and feature additions that are just coming through the platform, and there is a roadmap that Microsoft published on these things. Not all of them see the light of day, but there's continuous development. One of the more interesting things which I overheard over the grapevine is that Microsoft are sort of entering into the contact center space themselves. So there's going to be more about this announced into Microsoft Build, which happens in July. It's going to build on the existing collaborative calling, which is using Teams channels to provide kind of centralized management of call logs, etc., voicemail, etc. And they're going to build on that to sort of make a contact center like application natively within Microsoft Teams.
Fantastic, and I'm sure Copilot will come into play somewhere along the lines there as well, if there's any place for it.
There's very little that Microsoft hasn't already put its ChatGPT/Copilot functionality into, so there's going to be huge swathes of those things. So I'm very excited to see how that materializes.
Fantastic, Mike. Thank you so much. We're just at the tail end now and pretty much through our half an hour. So I just want to say thanks ever so much for everyone joining today. We do host these monthly, and in fact, with the next one we're doing in May, it's actually around security. We have Fortinet, slightly different topic, but nonetheless, a core part of what we kind of support within the organisation. We'll be following up with more Teams updates, more things that are happening around the wider technology that we kind of support. But again, I've said a couple of times, any questions from anyone, please do reach out to us. We'll reach out to you. We'll share the recording and we'd like to sort of see this and share it within the organisations. But look, thank you so much for spending half an hour of your day with us today. I hope it's been useful. We've taken something away from it, and we'll hopefully be seeing you some more at the next webinars or other events. So thank you so much.